A couple of weeks ago, when we were beginning to plan today's service, I sent Ed Scott, our worship associate today, the hymns and the hymn suggestions and the title for the reading that I just read. And Ed wrote back and sweetly suggested that I might have made a mistake in typing the title for the reading. He asked, I have to ask, is the title really "You Are Not Enough"? And it's a good question, right? Because what candidate for minister would stand up here and tell the congregation that you are not enough? So let me be clear. This reading is really not to say that individually we're somehow deficient or something like that, but to say that there is a wholeness found when people come together in love. It's a humanist response, really, to this month's theme of wholeness. It's a lifting up of our shared human capacity for restoration and for healing. In some Christian circles, wholeness is better understood as more of a cosmic restoration. It's rooted in the belief that human beings have come into the world broken, thanks in part to events between Adam and Eve and a piece of fruit and a snake. Snakes. And what Christians believe is that in baptism, one is restored to wholeness, to perfection, to reunion with God. But no matter one's beliefs, to talk about wholeness then is to also somehow hold brokenness. There's an old Jewish myth that says that in the beginning of time, God said, "Let there be light." And divine light came into being. And it was contained in 10 holy vessels. And God sent those vessels forth, that light forth, but in some great accident, all of the vessels shattered into countless fragments of light. And in that way, our cosmic wholeness here on earth got fractured. And we, as humans, are meant to repair that brokenness, repair the world, which is described in Hebrew as tikkun olam, repair the world. Now, I confess that sometimes I get a little cynical about this responsibility to repair the world. Whether we're talking about warring nations or warring political parties, whether we're talking about gun violence or poverty or racism, devastation to our natural resources, sometimes it all feels beyond repair. But I also have moments when I believe that that work is possible. In fact, I entered seminary with the idealistic, rose-colored belief that religious people could and would repair the world. And in my very first year of seminary, we experienced the attacks of 9/11, 2001, which deeply challenged that idealism. And then fast forward 9 years to September 2010. I was just stepping into my role as minister of Denton Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Denton, Texas. And in that first year, I noticed that so-called interfaith gatherings, like the National Day of Prayer event that's held in Denton on the town square each year, these so-called interfaith gatherings were really just a mix of different Christian leaders. And Denton is actually very religiously diverse. In fact, Denton is home to the first mosque in all of Texas. And I was noticing that we were also heading into this 10th anniversary of those 9/11 attacks. And I decided to call a meeting of my more progressive Christian colleagues and wondered with them about the absence of truly interfaith gatherings in Denton and asked whether we might create a shared interfaith worship service on that 9/11 anniversary. And as I spoke to them, I got more and more animated. I was like, not just Christians, but we could have Buddhists and Jews and Hindus and pagans and Baha'i and of course our Muslim neighbors. And I watched my progressive Christian colleagues puzzle over this for a little bit. They shifted in their seats. One person finally spoke and said, "Do we even have Buddhists in Denton?" And someone else asked, "Well, if we all believe different things, how can we worship together? I mean, we have different ideas about God. Some people don't even believe in one true God." And it was at this moment that I realized that as Unitarian Universalists, we have an incredible gift to bring to interfaith work. I talked about the shared values that we all have, love, compassion, justice, diversity. I talked about the power of a person sharing their heart, sharing their beliefs without any need to convert other people to their beliefs. They were still very hesitant about all of this, and they weren't hesitant about the idea. They were just not sure we could actually pull this thing off. And so I said, let me just draft something up, a worship service, and then we'll meet and we'll talk about it. And so they said we could do that. And some weeks later, we met again, and we had this draft worship service in hand. It included singing songs and reading from sacred texts, faith leaders sharing short statements about what they hope for. It was a worship service that, for me, was just like any other Unitarian Universalist worship service. So if you think we don't, get our stuff out there, we do. But for these colleagues of mine, these progressive Christian colleagues, it was blowing their minds. They did not expect to come away from that meeting with a worship service that would include their beliefs and also be inclusive of very diverse other beliefs. After all, the Buddhists would be there, And so we went ahead with planning. And as a new minister, and I was a new minister then, I hadn't yet learned the art of delegating. And so in addition to writing the service, I also was in charge of calling all of these different faith leaders and asking them to participate in our service in different ways. And everyone was super excited and really on board, except the Imam. And of all the faith leaders to express reluctance, the Imam was the one person I really needed to be present at this service. And he wasn't against the service. He understood that we were not going to replay the events of 9/11, but instead we were attempting to create a shared expression of interfaith solidarity and hope for the future. I expressed that we celebrated his Islamic faith and all of these other traditions, and we just wanted to make that celebration public. He said he supported the idea. He even said he would attend, but he did not want to participate, and nor would anyone else from the mosque. Now remember that I was new to these kinds of politics, and because he was so friendly but kind of elusive about the whole thing, my response was simply to just keep calling him every few weeks to try to change his mind. And finally, we were only weeks before the event when the Imam finally named his reluctance. Fear. Part of the history in Denton, Texas, that I only came to know during these months of planning for that 9/11 service is that in the days after the September 11th, 2001 attacks, when anti-Islamic hate was building throughout our country, their historic Denton Mosque, their sacred religious home, was firebombed. And frankly, I don't believe that the larger community knew how to respond to that in 2001. And there we were, nearly 10 years later, and of course this Islamic community and their imam were terrified for their physical safety, to stand in a church and affirm their faith in front of hundreds of strangers. Of course, they were afraid. Our reading today reminds us that alone one can feel overwhelmed and hopeless. Alone, one must fend for oneself. Alone, one is left to only one's personal experiences and knowledge. Alone, we are not enough. But together, we ended up inviting a Muslim speaker from outside of Denton, someone who didn't share that particular history. And the Imams celebrated this choice and enthusiastically supported the service, attending along with many other members of the Denton Mosque. And during that worship service, hundreds of people gathered in a large Methodist sanctuary, representing a diversity of religious traditions. And they gathered all of those voices together, and we sang this song that we sang today, "We Would Be One." The words are set to a tune called Finlandia. And when I was planning that 9/11 service, I noticed that many different hymnals across many different denominations, even religious traditions, return to that Finlandia tune to sing about unity and hope and gratitude and peace. Our own hymnal includes 2 hymns set to this tune. The other one is "This Is My Song." And throughout that 9/11 worship service, we returned to that tune over and over and over again, singing a verse from the Lutheran hymnal, and then singing a verse from the Methodist hymnal, and then a verse from the Reformed Church hymnal, and a verse from our hymnal. We went from singing, "This is my song, O God of all the nations," to "We would be one." And as those gathered sang that tune over and over and over again, anyone who didn't know it by the end knew it really well. And with rising confidence, all of those hundreds of people just got louder and louder and louder. And on September 11th, 2011, in a large packed out sanctuary in Denton, Texas, a whole lot of people suddenly experienced a very profound sense of wholeness that we didn't know was possible and that we didn't even know we needed. It built healing connections among religious groups and individuals that are still felt today. And when I want to believe in the possibility of repairing the world, I go back to all those people joining together their voices, singing, "We would be one." And when I want to return to my own personal wholeness, I recall my Arizona mountaintop experience. I might even close my eyes and imagine the land and the air and the getting lost and the finding my way, a time and place where I feel like the earth herself saved me. But wholeness doesn't have to be a grand worship service or a big mountaintop experience. Many of you know that I was born and raised in Wilmington. What you probably do not know is that my very first job, like my very first official paycheck kind of job, was between my freshman and sophomore years of high school, when I was the substitute daycare teacher over at the Educational Enrichment Center. All comes back around, doesn't it? So for that summer, I was the on-call backup when teachers couldn't work, like if they were going on vacation or sick or whatever. And so over the course of the summer, I got to work in every one of the classrooms. And my very, very favorite class to work in was the infant room. It was in the infant room where I learned how to rock a baby in each arm while using my foot to rock one of those little plastic rockers, this before they had motors in them, and rock a third baby. It's not a skill I've needed since then, but it's good that I have it. And what I loved most about the infant room were those teachers. They were 3 women, and they were, by far, the oldest of all the teachers in the daycare. And as far as I could tell, they were really, really old. But these 3 women, they radiated a constant and glorious love for these babies that surprised me. In the infant room, every single morning, children would scream when their parent left. And every morning, these women would hold these babies with complete empathy for the deep grief that was being experienced there. They held these babies and they assured them of their safety and their well-being, and they reflected back to them their light and their goodness and their value until such time when those babies could assure themselves. I began to think that these women had among the most important jobs in all the world. Alone, we are not enough. But when we are with one another, our tears can be accompanied by the comfort of companionship. When we are with another, one seemingly impossible challenge is divided by half. Today's reading places wholeness not on any one person, not on any one group, but on the spaces between us. When I've worked with couples who are married or preparing to get married, I've seen so many instances where couples are doing a great job maybe of tending to oneself or tending to their partner, but failing to nurture the relationship itself, that space between them. They get so busy or so mired in their routines that their conversations are always about worry about the past or the future, and their time together is always driven by productivity or need. And what their relationship needs is for them to have time together where they could just breathe into the present. Maybe name what they love about being in relationship together. Maybe tend to the changes that need to be made in their relationship for it to be stronger. Maybe laugh together and hold hands. And sure, maybe go to the grocery store and run errands and all of those sort of things, but maybe do it for the express purpose of nurturing the relationship, holding the relationship as more important than the to-do list. And I imagine this is true for all of our relationships. There's so much distraction that keeps us from tending to those spaces in between us, tending to relationships with one another, tending to our relationships with our natural world. In my experience, when those connections, those relationships are not being tended to, the space between us can fill with a whole lot of anxiety and a whole lot of ill feelings and apathy and even hate. The walls start going up. We start isolating ourselves. Alone, we are not enough. But when we are with many, our work is shared. Our insights and wisdom multiply with the presence of others at the table. In the beginning of time, God said, "Let there be light." And divine light came into being and was contained in 10 holy vessels, and God sent that light forth. But in a great accident, the vessel shattered into countless fragments of light, and in those fragments, those sparks, they traveled all over and they became hidden in people. Those sparks became hidden in plants, in animals, in nature, in events. Rachel Naomi Remen says that the whole human race is a response to this accident. We are here because we are born with the capacity to find hidden light in all events and in all people, to lift up that light and make it visible once again, and thereby to restore the innate wholeness of the world. And the great miracle is that by lifting up the light in someone else or something else, your own light gets magnified and wholeness is restored. And opportunities to do this work are all around you every single day, all the time. And so when cynicism or apathy or hate or anger get the best for you, look for the light. Rachel Naomi Remen says, our work at this time and place is to heal the world one heart at a time. And all we have to do is draw out the light, draw out the love that we have in our own hearts, and we reflect back to one another.